The desert does not care about the plans of men. Across the blood-red earth of New Mexico Territory in 1882, the sun burned everything alive with merciless indifference. The wind carried dust and the scent of something ancient, long dead. In the middle of that vast ocean of sand, a small figure stumbled forward. A calico dress, once blue, now faded to gray. The hem torn ragged, boots split at the toe. A trembling hand unfolded a map creased 17 times, until the paper had gone soft as cloth. Eyes dropped to the paper, then lifted to the empty land, then dropped to the paper again. Something cold moved through her chest, slow, deliberate, like a knife in the hand of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. This map was wrong, not wrong by accident. Wrong in the way that someone had calculated carefully. So the desert could finish the work he did not wish to do himself. The canteen at her hip rattled. Almost empty. In the distance, a dark figure stood motionless beside a boulder. The desert doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care about the map you folded 17 times until the creases went soft as old cloth. It doesn't care about the 3 months you spent listening at doors, memorizing schedules, hiding coins in the lining of a boot, one at a time, so the weight wouldn't shift and give you away. It doesn't care that you were clever, that you were careful, that you thought, God help you. You actually thought. You had thought of everything. The desert just sits there, burning, waiting. Wren Calloway had been walking for 6 hours when she finally admitted the map was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not off by a mile or two, the kind of wrong you correct by angling left at the next ridge. Wrong in the way that mattered most. The trail to Santa Fe, the one marked in faded ink, the one she'd memorized until she could trace it with her eyes closed, didn't exist out here. Not in the Chihuahuan Desert in September of 1882. Not in this particular stretch of New Mexico Territory, where the ground was the color of dried blood, and the only things growing were thorned and small and furious about it. She stopped walking, looked at the map, looked at the land, looked at the map again. Somewhere between those two looks, a cold thing moved through her chest. Slow, deliberate. The way a knife moves when someone who knows what they're doing is holding it. He changed it, not the desert, not bad luck, not the careless error of some mapmaker, working by poor lamplight in a territory office. Somewhere far from here, Silas Vane had changed the map. Her uncle, her mother's brother. The man who had stood at her mother's grave with his hat pressed us to his chest, and his eyes dry as chalk, and told 12-year-old Wren that he would take care of her now, that she had nothing to worry about. That family looked after family, Silas Vane, who had handed her this map himself 3 weeks ago, who had said she could hear it now, the particular smoothness of his voice, the way he talked like water moving around a rock, finding the easiest path, never fighting anything directly. The trail's well marked, Wren. Any fool could follow it. Any fool, she understood now. She understood completely. He hadn't tried to stop her from running, because he didn't need to. He'd just redirected her. Pointed her straight into the part of New Mexico, where the land killed people quietly, and left nothing behind to ask questions about. No scene, no confrontation. No difficult explanations to give the county office or the Methodist congregation, or any of the other audiences Silas Vane performed goodness for. Just a woman who ran. And a desert that finished the job smart, she thought. And hated that she meant it. Her horse was gone. Not lost. Gone in the way that was worse than lost. Pepper had stepped into a dry wash 2 miles back, hidden under a shelf of overhanging rock, and the crack of her left foreleg had been the loudest sound Wren had ever heard. Louder than the door slamming the night Silas told her about Doyle Greer. Louder than her own voice when she said no. Louder than everything. She'd done what had to be done. Stood there for a full minute after, with the pistol still warm. Her hand not shaking, which surprised her, the not shaking. And then she'd picked up the canteen from the saddle and the small canvas bag, with the money and the bedroll, and she'd started walking. That was this morning. The canteen now rattled, mostly air. The afternoon sun pressed down with the flat, impersonal cruelty of something that wasn't angry at her, just indifferent. Indifference was worse. Anger at least meant you registered. Anger meant you were worth the energy of being hated. Indifference meant you were already gone. Wren stopped at the shadow of a boulder, sat down on the ground, didn't decide to sit. Her legs just stopped participating and the ground came up to meet her. Okay, she could think. She was good at thinking. Thinking was the thing that had kept her going through 4 months of widowhood and 6 weeks of increasing pressure and 3 months of planning behind a face she kept carefully blank. Thinking had gotten her here, into the desert with a near-empty canteen and a dead horse and a wrong map. Right. Perhaps thinking had a ceiling. She closed her eyes, felt the heat on her face like a pressing hand. The wind moved across the flats in long, slow sighs, carrying grit, carrying the smell of something dry and ancient, carrying absolutely nothing helpful. Thomas would have laughed. Her husband, dead 14 months now, dead of typhoid fever in their small house in Silver City, before she'd had time to understand that a man could be fine on Tuesday and gone by Friday. Thomas would have laughed at this. Not unkindly. That wasn't in him. He had a gift for finding the absurdity inside disaster, and he would have looked at this situation, the map, the horse, the desert, the uncle, and he would have said something so precisely, gently ridiculous that she would have laughed too, and then they would have figured it out together. She wasn't laughing, and there was no together. Stop it. She opened her eyes, looked at her hands. The marks on her wrists had faded from purple to yellow-green, the specific palette of a bruise moving toward memory. Silas had tied her wrists the night she'd refused Doyle Greer for the second time. Not tight enough to damage, he'd been careful about that. Silas was always careful about leaving evidence. Just tight enough to make the point. Just tight enough to say, you don't have the option of refusing. She'd untied herself with a hairpin at 3 in the morning and been out the window before 4. She pressed her thumb against the fading bruise, pressed until it ached. Reminded herself what she was running from. Reminded herself that whatever happened out here in the scrub and the heat and the grinding nothing, it was still better than the alternative, Doyle Greer, 54 years old, who had already buried 2 wives in the churchyard outside Masilla, who had looked at Wren at the dinner Silas, arranged with the particular evaluating look of a man assessing livestock, who had said, pleasantly, over a plate of beef and pickled vegetables, that he preferred his women manageable. Yes, the desert was still better. She stood up, picked up the canteen, started walking again. The Gila River was somewhere north and west. The San Pedro ran somewhere to the west. She'd seen the name on the real map, the one she'd found in the county land office, and memorized before Silas could know she'd been there. Thin blue line, the promise of water. The question was distance. The question was always distance out here, and she was past rationing. If there was water ahead, she'd find it more clearly, with a full stomach of the last of what she had. Then she would fuzzy-headed and careful. Thomas had taught her that. Full commitment or none at all, Wren. Half measures just mean you die slower. He'd been talking about a business decision at the time. It applied. She found the shade of a tall sandstone formation around mid-afternoon and sat down and drank the last of the water. All of it. Then she put the empty canteen in her lap and looked out at the shimmering distance and let herself be very still. She might have slept, she wasn't sure. What she was sure of was that she hadn't heard anything. Not a footstep. Not a breath. Not the small displacement of air that should accompany the movement of something as large as a man crossing the 20 feet between the edge of the rock formation and where she sat. She was absolutely sure of all of that, which made it considerably more alarming when she lowered her hat from her face and found him already there. He stood in the shadow at the edge of the boulder, maybe 15 feet away, maybe less. The shade was deep enough that she saw him in pieces first. the dark line of his silhouette against the dimmer rock. The particular stillness, not the stillness of someone holding still, but the stillness of someone for whom stillness was simply the natural state, the way water at rest doesn't strain to be still. It just is. Long dark hair pulled back and tied, the geometric pattern of something woven at his shoulder, a bow across his back, unstrung, hands loose at his sides, and then her eyes adjusted, and she saw his face and every story she'd ever heard, in every saloon and boarding house, and church hall from Silver City to El Paso came flooding back, at once, a cold wave, a drowning thing. Apache. She had the pistol out before she knew she was moving, both hands. The hammer back, the barrel aimed at the center of his chest. Her hands were shaking. Not the way they hadn't shaken after Pepper. The other way, the bad way. He didn't move, didn't step back, didn't raise his hands, didn't change his expression, which was nothing, not blank, exactly, something more deliberate than blank. The face of someone who has decided to show you only what he chooses, and has chosen, for the moment, to show you almost nothing. He looked at her. She looked at him. The wind moved between them, carrying grit and heat, and the smell of something distant. Then he reached slowly. Slowly enough that she could track every inch of the movement, slowly enough that he was clearly making it easy for her to track, into the leather satchel at his side, and he pulled out a canteen, leather-covered, dark with use, round and full and unmistakable. He held it out, not toward her hands, toward the ground between them. He set it in the dirt between them, stepped back 2 paces, and waited. Wren's throat moved. She was so thirsty. She was so profoundly, bodily, desperately thirsty that for a moment the pistol felt abstract, theoretical, a thing she was holding for reasons she'd have to explain later. Don't you dare lower that gun. Don't you dare. She lowered the gun, not all the way. Kept it in her hand, hammer back, pointed at the ground, but lowered. She leaned forward and picked up the canteen with her free hand and got the stopper out with her teeth and drank. Cold. Somehow still cold. In September, in the afternoon, in this desert, cold and clean and tasting of nothing but water. The first swallow hurt going down, the rawness of her throat catching on it. The second swallow didn't. By the third, she was breathing through her nose to keep from choking. When she finally stopped and looked up, he was watching her with that same expression. The deliberate nothing. But his eyes, dark as flint, sharp as everything that implied, had shifted slightly. Something in them that might have been recognition. Might have been something else entirely that she didn't have vocabulary for yet. She looked at him over the canteen. What do you want? She didn't say it. She thought it so loudly it might have been the same thing. His gaze moved, quick, professional. Her hands, the canteen, the pistol, the faded marks at her wrists, that the short sleeves of her calico dress left visible in the afternoon heat. The dress itself, blue gone gray with dust, hem ripped a foot up the side. Her boots split at the left toe. Then back to her face, he said 2 words, "River, come." The English was careful, deliberate, shaped like something he'd learned as a tool rather than a mother tongue. Wren stared at him, come, as if it were that simple, as if she were meant to stand up and follow a stranger into the desert, because he'd given her water and said 1 word. As if every instinct she'd been raised on, every warning she'd absorbed from 10 years of frontier life, every story, as if none of that had anything to do with what was actually in front of her, because what was actually in front of her was a man who had been close enough to touch her while she slept, who had not touched her, who had set the canteen in the dirt between them and stepped back, who was standing now with his hands loose and visible, and the bow across his back unstrung. An unstrung bow was not a ready weapon. He'd unstrung it before he came to her. The fear was still there. She wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. But underneath it, quieter and more certain, there was something else. Something her body seemed to know before her mind had quite caught up. He could have left you here. She got to her feet. Her legs protested. Her entire body protested. She ignored it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been ignoring her body's objections for months. "Where?" she said. He turned and started walking without looking back to see if she followed. She followed. He moved like water over rock. That was the only way she could describe it. Smooth. Inevitable. Finding the easiest path not by searching for it, but by some internal knowing, as if the terrain was already mapped inside him. And his feet were simply confirming what he already understood. He didn't hurry. He didn't slow down for her either. He just moved at a pace that was slightly beyond comfortable, and trusted that she'd either keep up or she wouldn't. She kept up. She thought of him as the man. Unhelpfully generic, but accurate. They walked through the late afternoon heat in silence that was, surprisingly, not uncomfortable. The silence had texture. Not the silence of two people with nothing to say, but the silence of two people concentrating. She was concentrating on not falling. He was concentrating on everything, the way his head moved in minimal tilts, reading angles, the way he tracked something to their left for 100 yards, before apparently concluding it was not relevant. He was reading the desert the way she'd learned to read people, constantly, efficiently, without letting the reading show. The Peloncillo Mountains rose ahead of them in the distance, layered purple and red in the late light. She hadn't known she was this close to them. "You're very far from anywhere," her mind supplied helpfully. "Thank you," she told it. Tremendously useful. The sun moved lower. Shadows stretched. The man angled them toward a cut in the foothills she hadn't seen until they were almost inside it. A slot canyon, tight and cool. The temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment they entered the shade of those walls. She exhaled, hadn't realized she'd been holding that. The walls rose on either side, sandstone in every shade of red and orange, layered like the pages of a very old book. Swallows moved in the updrafts above. The sound changed in here, contained, focused, the scrape of boots on rock, suddenly audible, in a way it hadn't been on the open flats. Then he stopped. She stopped 2 feet behind him, watching. He turned his head slightly, not to look at her, to listen. His whole body had shifted into a different quality of stillness. Not the rest state from before, but something active. Aimed. Then she heard it too. Or rather, she heard its absence. The swallows had stopped. He turned and looked at her. Quick. Then moved to the canyon wall and pressed himself into a shallow alcove in the rock, and with one motion of his hand made it clear she should do the same. She did. She pressed herself into the rock beside him. There wasn't much room. She could feel the warmth of the stone at her back, and the entirely different warmth radiating from the man 6 inches to her left. She held absolutely still and listened. Hooves distant but coming closer. The flat, hard rhythm of horses moving fast on rocky ground. The cold thing moved through her chest again. Knife slow, lorn. She'd been expecting it. She'd known, walking out of Silas's house in the dark, that Marshall Briggs Lorne would be part of whatever came next. He always was. He'd been following her orbit for 3 years, since she'd turned down his proposal in the lobby of the Silver City Hotel with enough witnesses to make it public in a way that still, clearly, burned. Men like Lorne didn't file things under closed. They filed them under unfinished. The sound of hooves peaked, then passed, then faded. She counted to 60. The man beside her was already moving again before she reached it. Stepping out of the alcove, glancing back at her with that expression. The deliberate nothing, the watching, and then angling forward toward the light at the far end of the canyon. She followed. 3 more hours. That was how long it took. By the time they crested the final ridge, and she looked down at what lay below, Wren Calloway had stopped thinking about water and maps and Silas and Lorne, and everything else she'd been carrying since dawn. She stopped thinking entirely. The valley was something she didn't have a word for. Green. Genuinely, implausibly green, cupped between the red walls of the mountains, like something being deliberately protected. Cottonwoods along a stream she could hear from the ridge, their silver leaves catching the last light and scattering it. Smoke from cooking fires rose in thin blue threads into the cooling air, and along the creek and up the lower slopes. A camp. Not a small camp. Structures of willow poles and hides, arranged with a logic she couldn't immediately read. Horses in a rope enclosure on the eastern side. Women moving between fires. Children running. The sound of their voices reached her in fragments, laughter, the particular shriek of a child caught in a game. Men at the creek, men working with leather and tools. Men already watching the ridgeline because the man she'd followed had appeared on it. And then every one of them was watching her. She felt it. Every head that turned. Every calculation that began. The man beside her made a brief sound, a signal. Something answered from below. Then he started down the slope. She stood on the ridge for 3 more seconds. "What are you doing, Wren? What in the name of God are you doing?" The entire point of running was to not walk directly into. She started down the slope. The woman met them at the edge of camp, tall, nearly as tall as the man, with dark hair in a single braid and eyes the color of creek stones, dark and smooth and showing exactly nothing. She wore a dress of worked leather with beading at the collar, and she stood with the absolute stillness that Wren was beginning to understand was not a performance here. It was a baseline, the place from which other states departed. She looked at Wren. The look lasted long enough to make Wren feel like a document being read. Then she looked at the man and spoke. Apache, rapid and low, the vowels unfamiliar, the cadence rising and falling in patterns Wren couldn't map, not anger, exactly. Closer to the tone of someone asking a question they already suspect the answer to. The man answered, shorter, quieter. The woman's eyes came back to Wren, and then something happened that Wren wasn't prepared for. The woman looked down. At Wren's left hand. At the hairpin she'd been gripping without realizing. The tortoiseshell pin. The only piece of her mother's jewelry she'd kept. The one she wore every day because. Some things you carry, not because they're useful, but because they're proof that certain things happened. The woman's expression changed. Not much, not dramatically. Just a small movement at the corners of her eyes. A tightening, then a releasing. Something recognized, something encountered, and then deliberately filed away for later. She said one word to the man. He answered 2. Then she looked at Wren and said, in careful accented English, "You sleep, eat tomorrow." "We see," Wren said. "Thank you." The woman walked away. The man, she still didn't know his name. She'd been following a nameless man for 3 hours across the desert, and she didn't know his name. He watched his sister go. Then turned back to Wren. "Saya," he said, and nodded after the departing woman, his sister. Wren understood that from the tone alone. She waited. "Tahoe," he said, and touched his chest once. She understood that too. "Wren," she said, and touched her own chest. He nodded, the way he'd nodded when she'd told him she was lost. Satisfied, brief. A thing acknowledged and now known. Then he turned and walked away. She stood in the middle of the camp with people looking at her. She looked back, not defiantly, not with the pretend confidence she'd learned to deploy, in rooms full of men who wanted her to feel small. Just directly, with the simple animal directness of a person who has used up all of her social performance for one day and has nothing left with which to pretend. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, appeared in front of her and stared up with the specific unguarded curiosity of a child who hasn't yet learned to disguise his interest. She looked back at him. He held out a gourd, water. She took it, drank, handed it back. He took it and ran. That was the first act of uncomplicated kindness she'd received in this place. It came from a child who didn't know who she was or why she was there. Just, "Here is water. You look like you need it." She pulled herself together, found the lump in her throat and pushed it back down. "Not yet," she told it. "Not here. Hold together." They put her in a small structure near the creek, separate from the others, close enough to hear the water. The inside was dim and smelled of sage and a particular dried grass she'd come to find calming later, though she didn't know that yet. Woven mats, a rolled blanket. She sat down, The sounds of the camp came through the walls, voices in a language she didn't speak. The creak of rope, the pop of fires, the horses, the creek, running over its stones. All of it muffled and near. She should have been terrified. She should have been running calculations. Where was she? Who were these people? What did they want? How did she get out? What were her options? What was the nearest town? What was? Her hands were in her lap, still, not shaking, not planning, not running any calculations at all. She looked at them. Odd, she lay down on the mat and closed her eyes, and realized, in the specific, peculiar way of something you only notice in its absence, that she hadn't checked the door. In Silas Vane's house, she had checked every door every night since she was 17. Had become so automatic she'd stopped knowing she was doing it. Lock or the wedge of wood she'd made for herself after the first time Silas came in without knocking. Check, always. Every single night. She hadn't checked this door. She lay there and thought about that. And then she stopped, thinking, and fell asleep between one breath and the next, dropping into the dark the way a stone drops into still water. Fast, and without any drama, and leaving barely a ripple behind. Outside, the camp quieted by degrees, fires banked, voices softened. The children were gathered in. At the edge of the structure where Wren Calloway slept, a figure settled into stillness in the dark. Back against the post, bow across his knees, eyes on the ridgeline to the east. He didn't move. He didn't sleep. He watched the ridge the way a man watches something he doesn't have a name for yet but knows, in the marrow of him, that he is responsible for. Somewhere on the eastern side of the mountains, small fire burned. Not cook fires, not the fires of people sleeping. The fires of people waiting. 4 of them. Clustered. Visible from the ridge if you knew where to look. He knew exactly where to look. And he had been looking since well before midnight. Wren woke before dawn, to the sound of the creek and the distant call of something she couldn't name. She lay still for a moment, oriented herself in pieces. The smell, the texture of the mat beneath her, the weight of her own body, which ached in every muscle and didn't apologize for it. She reached up and touched the hairpin in her hair. Still there, her mother's hands had made that pin, had carved it and smoothed it and set the small silver wire that held the cluster of stones at the top. Turquoise, 3 small pieces, worn and slightly clouded. Her mother had worn it every day until she died. And then Wren had worn it every day after. Because some things you carry, not because they're useful, but because they're the only proof that certain things happened. She sat up. Through the gap in the doorway, she could see the first gray lightening of the sky above the eastern ridge. And on the ridge itself, against that gray, small lights, 4 of them, moving. She was on her feet before she understood that she'd decided to stand. Tahoe was already there. Not at the camp's edge where she'd half noticed him settling last night. Here, 5 feet from her, fully awake, the bow already strung. She noticed that specifically. The bow had been unstrung when he came to her in the desert. It was strung now. He'd seen the lights before her, of course he had. He looked at her. That look. The deliberate nothing. But underneath it, just barely, at the edges, something she recognized, because she'd been wearing it herself for 3 months. He wasn't surprised. He'd known they were there. She opened her mouth. "You knew," she said. He held her eyes. He didn't confirm or deny. Just looked at her with that look that was starting, she realized, to mean something she could read. Not nothing. The opposite of nothing. A very great deal, expressed without words. "How long?" she asked. "Before you slept." He said. She thought about the night, the fires she hadn't known to look for, the figure outside her door, bow on knees, eyes on the ridge, watching the danger the entire time she was sleeping so she didn't have to. Her throat did something complicated. She pushed past it. "What do we do?" He turned and looked at the camp, already stirring. The first people emerging. The heightened attention of a community that had sensed something shift in the dark. Then he looked back at her. And for the first time, something moved in his face that wasn't controlled. something that showed itself before he could decide whether to show it or not. Quick there, and then managed. "We don't run," he said. The word landed in her like a stone dropped in still water. We. She'd been running alone for so long. We was a word that required more than one person. The camp was waking around them. Chief Noka appeared at the door of the largest structure. Silver-streaked hair, straight-backed, radiating the specific gravity of a man who has absorbed many mornings like this one and knows that panic is the luxury of people with fewer choices. The eastern sky was bleeding lighter. The fires on the ridge were moving. Wren Calloway stood in the doorway of the structure where she'd slept and looked at the approaching lights and felt, very clearly, the specific shape of the choice in front of her. Run. She could run. She knew how. She'd gotten very good at it, or she thought of the canteen set in the dirt between them. The 2 steps back. The bow unstrung. She thought of the creak sound she'd fallen asleep to. The child with the gourd. She thought of Silas Vane, dry-eyed at a graveside, saying, "Family looks after family." She thought of the map. The wrong map. The desert that was supposed to finish the job. Wren Calloway straightened her spine. She was 25 years old. She'd been a daughter and a wife and a ward, and a piece of property that argued back. She'd spent 3 months becoming the kind of woman who could plan an escape and execute it in darkness, and walk 20 miles on a broken plan without lying down. She was not going to run. Not this time. Not from this. "Tell me what you need," she said. Something settled in Tahoe's face. Something decided. He turned toward the camp, and his voice went out across the morning in Apache, low, carrying. The sound of a man who doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't need to. And the valley woke up completely. The fires moved closer. The sky went from gray to the thin, fragile gold of a sun not yet fully committed. And Wren stood in it, her hand touching the turquoise pin in her hair without knowing she was doing it. And she did not move. She was already, though she couldn't have named it yet, exactly where she was supposed to be. The fires on the ridge went dark before sunrise. Not because Lorne had gone, because he'd gotten smart. Smarter than she'd given him credit for. He'd killed the fires and pulled back into the rocks where shadow was deepest, watching, calculating. The way a man calculates when he knows time is on his side. And patience cost him nothing. Tahoe knew it too. She could tell by the way he didn't relax. The camp went about its morning. Fires lit, water carried, children fed. The ordinary machinery of a community that had learned over generations of exactly this kind of morning, how to hold danger in one hand and daily life in the other, without dropping either, but underneath it. Underneath all the ordinary sounds and ordinary movements. Attention, the specific tension of people who are very good at pretending they aren't afraid. Wren recognized it. She'd been performing that same act for 3 months in Silas Vane's house. She recognized it the way you recognize a language you didn't know you spoke. Saya came for her after breakfast. No preamble, no greeting. Just appeared at the door, with something folded over her arm, and looked at Wren with the document-reading look. That was, Wren was coming to understand, simply Saya's face when she was paying full attention, which appeared to be always. She held out what she was carrying. Wren took it, unfolded it. A garment in the Chihuahua style. She had enough sense not to apply her own vocabulary too confidently to something she didn't understand. Worked leather, soft as cloth from long use, the color of desert sand in the late afternoon when the light goes golden and warm. Yellow. Earth. Old gold. The color of the land that made it, kidskin, she thought. Something that had been worked by hand, broken down from stiff to supple by the specific labor of someone's palms over a long time. A fitted top and a long skirt, and down both sleeves and along the hem. Fringe. Long leather fringe. The kind that caught air and moved like water. The kind that made sound when you walked. A quiet whisper of leather against leather that was its own kind of presence. At the neckline, beadwork. Turquoise. Small pieces. The specific blue-green of stones that came from this desert, this ground. drilled and saw-strung in a pattern. She couldn't read the meaning of, but felt the geometry of. Not only decorative. Something intentional in the arrangement. The garment was not new. Old in the way of use. Old in the way of a thing that had lived. There were small repairs at the left shoulder. Careful stitching that matched so well you had to look twice to find it. A place at the hem where the fringe had been re-knotted. A faint mark at the hip that might have been anything. A stain from river clay. A mark from a fire, a record of a moment she would never know. Someone had worn this. Someone had lived in it. Wren looked up at Saya. Saya said, "Your dress will kill you here." The color. The cloth. Everything wrong for this land. A pause. "This one is right." Another pause. "Shorter, put it on." Wren looked at the garment in her hands. She thought about what it meant to wear another woman's clothes. What it meant to be handed something this old, this worn, this clearly not a thing someone parted with casually. She did not ask whose it was. She did not ask why. She said, "Could I have a moment?" Saya turned and walked out without answering, which Wren chose to interpret as yes. She changed alone. The calico dress, blue gone gray, hem wrecked, baked through with 2 days of desert. She folded carefully. Muscle memory. You folded things. You kept things neat. The habit of a woman who'd grown up in a house where disorder had consequences. Then she stopped, looked at the folded dress, put it in the corner, left it there. The Chiricahua garment went on differently than she expected. Not complicated, just a different logic. A different relationship between the garment and the body. It sat differently, breathed differently. The leather was warm against her skin. The fringe moved when she did. That small sound, leather against leather, a whisper. She took her hair down. Finger-combed it imperfectly. Put the tortoise-shell pin in the pocket, sewn inside at the waist. Small, practical, lined with woven cloth, where it would be safe. Then she stood for a moment. "How do I look?" she thought. And then, "Who are you asking?" And then, "It doesn't matter. This isn't about how you look." She walked outside. Saya turned. The document look again. Quick, top to bottom. Something moved in it. Not approval exactly. Something more complicated than approval. She stepped forward, took the 2 long lengths of Wren's hair and arranged them. Quick, efficient. The way a woman who has done this 10,000 times does it. Into the style Wren would come to recognize as the everyday style of Chiricahua women. 2 braids, secured. Simple, correct. Then Saya stepped back, looked at her, said nothing. Which was, Wren was beginning to understand. Saya's version of approval. The days moved differently than she expected. She'd expected to feel like a specimen. A watched thing. And she was watched, in the beginning. Eyes tracking her movement through the camp. Conversations pausing when she came near. But the watching had a different quality than she'd braced for. Not hostile, mostly. Assessment. The kind of watching that is still deciding what something is before it decides how to feel about it. She dealt with it the way she'd learned to deal with most things. She worked. Not performatively. Not "look at me, I'm helping." Just, she saw things that needed doing and she did them. Carried water. Helped stretch a hide that needed 2 sets of hands. Sat with the older women at the grinding stones and watched first. Then tried. Then accepted their corrections with a nodded head, and no embarrassment about being bad at something new. Because she was bad at it. The motion was wrong. The pressure was wrong. Her wrists understood flour and butter, not this particular labor. She learned, slowly, imperfectly. But she learned. The children came first. Children always come first. They don't have the adult capacity for sustained, principled wariness. A child's curiosity is too strong for ideology. Within 3 days there was a boy, the same boy with the gourd, she was fairly sure, who had taken to appearing near wherever she was working, with the practiced casualness of a child, trying to look like he isn't following someone. She didn't acknowledge the following. Just let him be there. On the 4th day he spoke to her. Apache, fast, clearly a question. He pointed at the knuckle of her right index finger. where she developed a blister from the grinding stone that had since popped and was healing ugly. She said, "Blister." He tried to repeat it. Produced something that was technically the correct syllables in the wrong order. She laughed. It surprised both of them. She hadn't laughed she tried to count. She genuinely couldn't count how long. Months. The specific freedom of a laugh that comes from something actually funny. Not the social lubricant variety. Not the diffusing tension variety. Just something that strikes you as genuinely, helplessly funny. The boy's face split into a grin wide enough to be its own small son. After that, there were more children. Tahoe watched all of this. Not conspicuously. He wasn't standing anywhere watching her. He was just, frequently, in a position where watching was incidental. Working on the east side of the camp when she was on the east side. At the creek when she went for water. Not every time. Not in a way that announced itself. But she noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed the way you notice something you've been trying not to notice. Poorly. And then all at once. And then with the specific embarrassed clarity of someone who realizes they've been not noticing for longer than they thought. She was bad at not noticing Tahoe. She was going to need to do something about that, or not. Because the alternative to noticing Tahoe was, what? Going back to the calico dress. Going back to the wrong map. Going back to Silas Vane's house and the locked room and the particular quality of that silence. No, not that. She could notice Tahoe. Noticing was not the same as doing anything about it, and she had a very well-developed capacity for not doing things about situations that presented themselves. Ask Thomas. No, don't ask Thomas. Thomas was dead stop. She stopped, carried the water, kept her face extremely neutral. The conversation happened on the 6th evening. He found her at the creek after the camp went quiet, or she found him there. Semantics. The creek was running over its stones in the dark, and the cottonwood leaves were doing their silver shimmer, and somehow they were both there at the same time, which was either coincidence or it wasn't, and she'd run out of the energy required to make that distinction. She sat on a flat rock. He sat on the bank nearby. The creek between them, or nearly. The silence settled. The kind that has weight. The kind you can lean against. You're teaching yourself the grinding, he said. Not a question, I'm being taught, she said. There's a difference, he considered this. You don't fight the teaching, I'm bad at grinding. Fighting good instruction on top of being bad would just be inefficient. Something at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Close enough. She looked at the water. My husband, she said. She didn't plan to say it. It came out. Tahoe waited. Not with the performance of waiting. Not the leaned in, eyes wide. Tell me everything, waiting of someone who wants to be seen listening. Just waited. The way the creek waited to receive whatever the rain sent it. His name was Thomas Calloway. He was 31 years old and he died of typhoid fever on a Friday in July of last year, and on the Monday before that he was completely fine. A pause. I didn't get to say goodbye. No, Tahoe said. Did you? She stopped. I'm sorry. You don't have to, my wife, Tahoe said. The words came out level, practiced level. The levelness of a thing you've had to hold level for so long your hands have shaped themselves to the weight of it. Her name was Lila. She died in a fire. 1878. She knew what had caused fires in 1878. She knew who had caused fires in this territory in 1878. She said, I'm sorry. He looked at the creek. I was not there. I should have been there. I was elsewhere. A pause. I have decided not to carry that. The should. It changes nothing. That's easier to decide than to do. Yes, he said. I know. The creek moved. The cottonwoods shifted. Somewhere up the valley a horse made a soft sound. She looked at him, the line of his face in the dark, the specific stillness. And underneath it, she could see it now, had been seeing it for days without knowing what she was seeing. The long, patient shape of a grief that had settled in and arranged itself for the long stay. The grief of someone who had stopped fighting it and started carrying it. Because some things you cannot put down. She understood that. Maybe Better than most. Tahoe, she said. He looked at her. Thank you. For not leaving me in the desert, he was quiet for a moment. I almost didn't come, he said. I heard there was a woman alone on the flats, and I thought. He stopped. Choosing. I thought it was not my concern. What changed your mind? The corner of his mouth again. That almost thing, I went anyway, he said. Some decisions make themselves. She looked at him over the moving water, and felt something she wasn't ready to feel. She stood up. I should sleep, she said. Yes, he said, and didn't move. Good night, Wren. Her name in his mouth. The careful way he said it. The two syllables placed like something he was taking seriously. She went inside, did not check the door, lay down on the mat, stared at the woven ceiling. You are in serious trouble, she told herself. You are aware of that, right? You are fully, completely, catastrophically aware. She was aware. It didn't help even a little. Saya came for her on the 8th morning, not with garments this time. With the look, the document look, but with something added to it. Something that had been working itself toward a decision and had arrived. Walk with me. They walked to the creek where it bent around the base of the eastern cliff, away from camp. The sound of water-covered conversation. Saya stopped, turned, and Wren, who had been expecting information, or a condition of her continued presence, or a warning. She'd been expecting a version of a conversation she'd had before, in Silas's house and in 100 small rooms, where a woman's place in a situation was being clarified for her by someone who felt qualified to do the clarifying. She had not been expecting what Saya did instead, which was reach into the neck of her dress and pull out a hairpin, tortoise shell, small silver wire. 3 turquoise stones, worn and slightly clouded, identical to the one in Wren's pocket. Wren went completely still. Where did you get that? She said. A woman gave it to me, Saya said. When I was 14, I had fever. Very bad. Our camp had moved. There was danger. Everyone moved. She stayed. A pause. She was white. She stayed when everyone left. She had medicine. She sat with me for 4 days. Wren's hand found the pocket at her waist, without her deciding to reach for it. Closed around the pin inside. Her name, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. Did you know her name? She told me. I did not remember well, the fever. But she left this. Saya looked at the pin in her hand. I kept it. I don't know why. I just kept it, Margaret. Wren said. Her name was Margaret Calloway. She was my mother. Silence. The creek went over its stones. The cliff held its shadow. Saya looked at Wren for a long time with an expression Wren had no framework for. Not the document look. Something older than the document look. Something that had been waiting in a box for 16 years and had just been taken out and placed in the light. She survived the fever, Wren said. Mama. She lived another 2 years after that. She died when I was 16. Fever again. Different fever. She was good, Saya said. 2 words. Plain. True in the way that plain things are sometimes most true. Wren pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Don't, not here, not in front of. The sob came up anyway, small, controlled, but real. The kind that has been waiting so long it doesn't ask permission anymore. Saya did not hug her, did not make sounds of comfort, did not do any of the things Wren's culture had trained her to expect. She sat down on a rock by the creek and waited. The way the creek waited to receive whatever the rain sent it. After a while, Wren sat down too. They sat side by side for a long time without speaking. The cliff's shadow moved across the water. A hawk rode a thermal above the valley and was gone. Finally, Saya said, You have her eyes. People say that, it's true. Another silence. Your brother? Wren said carefully. Does he know? About my mother? Not yet. Why not? Saya looked at the water. I wanted to see who you were first, before I gave him that, and now? Saya stood, brushed off her skirt with the economical gesture of a woman who has other things to do, and has allocated this moment precisely the time it deserved. Now I know, she said, and walked back toward camp, leaving Wren with nothing but the creek, going over its stones and the hawk. Or a different hawk. She could never be sure, riding the thermal. and not particularly caring what happened below. That evening, at the creek, Wren handed Tahoe the letter Saya had given her alongside the pin, a folded piece of cloth containing paper with faded ink, written in a handwriting she'd have known anywhere. Her mother's handwriting. He read it. Twice. The careful, focused stillness of someone reading something that matters. Then he looked at her. Your mother, he said. Yes, she stayed with Saya. Yes. Something was happening in his face. The deliberate nothing was slightly less deliberate than usual. Not gone, just thinner. The way ice goes thin over deep water. She was sick for 4 days, he said. I was not there. When I came back, she was alive and the woman was gone. No one knew her name. Pause. I looked for her, for years, and instead, Wren said, he said, I found her daughter, the cottonwoods. The evening settling its weight over everything. Tahoe, she said. I need to tell you something else, and she told him about Silas. All of it. Not the version she'd told the council, the facts, the map, the land office, the telegraph office in Silver City, where she'd stood in a hallway for 20 minutes listening to a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. This version, the 3 years of it. The locked room, the wrong map. The desert that was supposed to finish the job so there was no scene, no confrontation, no untidy proof. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without interruption, without the performance of listening. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she started to wonder if she'd misjudged. If the telling had been too much. Then, I knew about Vane, he said. She stopped. What? A traitor. 6 weeks ago. He knew Vane's land dealings. He told me someone had sold information about this valley. She stared at him. You knew. Before I arrived. Yes, the anger came up fast. The specific hot anger of someone who has been protected without being asked. Who has had someone else make a unilateral decision about what they could handle. Why didn't you tell me? Because you had enough. That is not your decision to make. No, he said. Simply. Without argument, it wasn't. I was wrong not to tell you. I knew it then. I did it anyway. She looked at him. The anger was still there. But underneath it was something that was not anger at all. He did it anyway. Because he looked at her and thought, she has enough. Because he made a calculation that was entirely about her, about what she could carry. And the calculation was wrong, but the motivation, stop it, Red, stop. Don't do it again, she said. No, I won't. I mean it, I know. A long silence. You went out into the desert because of what the traitor told you, she said slowly. You were already looking for whoever had come this way, he said nothing. Which was an answer. You weren't there by accident. No. You could have just warned someone. Told them there was a woman coming who was being tracked. But you went yourself. The fire between them. The dark pressing in warm and enormous. Some decisions, he said, make themselves. She'd heard that before. She understood now what he'd meant. She looked at him across the fire and felt the thing in her chest that she'd been trying to name for days arrange itself into something she finally recognized. Terror, domiciled, clear-eyed, full disclosure terror, not of him, of how close it was. Of how little distance remained between where she was and the things she'd promised herself. After Thomas, after the locked room. After all of it, the things she'd promised herself she would never do again. Not again, she'd told herself. You cannot survive losing it again, but the distance was very small now. Getting smaller. I'm going to go inside, she said. All right, she stood. Looked at him one more time, the fire, the face, the long patience of him, the grief he carried the way water carries silt, part of its own nature now. Thank you, she said. For going yourself, he looked at her. And this time, the smile came. Not the small, restrained one from before. Something larger. Something that reached his eyes and changed his whole face for the length of a breath. You're welcome, Wren, he said. She went inside. Lay down. Stared at the ceiling. And thought, in the space between waking and sleep, of her mother's letter. I hope she finds whatever she is looking for. Maybe this is where it was. Maybe it was always going to be here. The council meeting happened on the 10th day. Wren heard the drums the night before. Not loud. Understated, a low pulse she felt more in the sternum than heard with her ears. She'd been in the camp long enough to understand that drums had registers. This one said, "Something is being decided here." She lay awake and thought, "This is fair. This is entirely fair. I walked into someone else's home and brought danger with me, and I have been here 10 days, and I sleep in their shelter and eat their food, and I have given them almost nothing in return except information about Silas, which I offered, and a few days of imperfect labor, and one moment of laughter at the grinding stones. If they ask me to leave, I will leave." And then what? She didn't have an answer she liked. The morning of the council, she woke early and went to the creek and washed her face in cold hot water and looked at her reflection. The braids, the fringe of the leather dress moving in the morning air, the turquoise pin she'd taken from her pocket and put back in her hair, the face that Saya said had her mother's eyes, and thought, all right, just no plan, no performance, no map. Chief Noka called the meeting at mid-morning. He sat at the center with the particular weight of a man who has been at the center of many such meetings and carries all of them. 60, she guessed, silver-streaked hair, a face that had held many expressions over a long time and settled into something that was all of them at once. Around him, the council, warriors. The elder women who Wren had learned held significant authority. Tahoe was there, on his father's left. Not looking at her, Saya was there, standing at the outer edge, arms folded. Wren stood, because sitting felt like waiting to be judged, and she was done with being judged from a chair. The discussion went in Apache for a long time. She watched faces. She'd had to become good at faces, growing up in Silas Vane's house, where the words and the meanings were frequently two different things, and you survived by learning to read the difference. She could read enough there. Were those who wanted her gone. Practically, not cruelly. She brought danger. Lorne's fires on the ridge were real. The risk was not theoretical. There were those who were uncertain. And there were those, fewer, but present, who looked at her with something closer to attention than coldness. The chief spoke. She waited. Tahoe turned to her. "He is asking what you have to say." She looked at Chief Noka. She said, "I know I don't have the right to be here. I know I brought something dangerous to your door, and I know every reason to send me away is a real reason." Tahoe translated, "Steady. But before you decide, there's something you need to know about why Lorne is really here," a shift in the room. The attention that had been general became specific. "My uncle is Silas Vane. He is a landman. He sold the location of this valley to Briggs Lorne 2 months ago. Not because he wanted me brought back. He doesn't care about me. He cares about the silver deposits east of this valley. He needed this land cleared before he could claim access rights." She paused. "I'm not the target. This valley is the target, and Lorne won't stop when I'm gone. He'll just have one fewer reason to be careful." Tahoe translated. The silence after it was a different quality of silence. Chief Noka looked at her for a long time. The kind of look that doesn't skim. That goes all the way in and takes its time on the way back. He said something to Tahoe. "He wants to know how you know this." "I stood in the hallway of the telegraph office in Silver City for 20 minutes, she said. "Silas didn't know I was there. I listened and I remembered every word. I've been listening to conversations I wasn't supposed to hear for a long time. It's a skill," Tahoe translated. And at the end, she was almost certain, added something that wasn't in what she'd said. Something brief. Something that made the elder woman nearest the chief make a short sound that might have been, in different circumstances, a laugh. She looked at Tahoe. His expression gave her nothing. Of course it didn't. The council broke to confer. Wren stood where she was, looked at the creek. The creek moved over its stones, unhurried, not particularly concerned. "Must be nice," she thought. Saya appeared beside her. "The elder women are for you staying. 2 of the warriors are not. My father is deciding, is always deciding. That is what he does." A pause. Tahoe has said nothing yet. Wren looked at her. Why not? Because when he speaks, it ends the discussion. Everyone knows which way it will go after Tahoe speaks, Saya's creekstone eyes. He is waiting to see if you need him to. Wren turned that over. He is waiting to see if you need him to. A man who has enough influence to end a conversation, choosing to hold it back. Not because he doesn't have a position. Because he wants to see if she can hold her own first. Something moved in her chest. She turned back to the creek. She would hold her own. She didn't need him to speak. But she noticed, and she was past pretending she didn't notice, that he was there. Had been there. Across the fire, and through the discussions, and at the creek in the evenings, and at the edge of her field of vision for 10 days. A constant without being a pressure. A presence that asked nothing. This is not the time, Wren. It is genuinely not the time. The chief made his decision before noon. She could stay, conditionally. Framed not as conditions but as expectations. More powerful. Because conditions can be negotiated, and expectations are just what is. That she would not be a burden, that she would work, that she would not attempt to leave and then return, that if Lorne came, she would not run to him. She agreed to all of it. The warrior who had argued most strongly against her staying looked at her for a long moment after, then gave one nod, not acceptance, not welcome. Just acknowledged she would take it. That night, Tahoe sat down at the edge of her firelight without asking. You didn't need me to speak, he said. No. I know, a pause. I wanted to. Why? Because my father's decision was not certain. You think it was. It wasn't. But you didn't speak. Because you were doing well. And because you needed to do it yourself. Not for my father. For you. She stared at him. That's a very particular kind of faith to have in someone you've known for 10 days. He looked at her then. Directly. Not 10 days, he said. I watched you on the flats before I came to you. An hour. Maybe more. You said you knew who I was. I knew who you were carrying, he said. Fear. But not the kind that breaks a person. The kind that sharpens them. Wren looked at the fire. I didn't know you were watching me. I know. For future reference, that is strange. I was going to say slightly alarming. Yes, he said. That too, and there it was. The first thing she could only describe as a smile. Small, restrained. The smile of a man who has not smiled very much for several years, and has not entirely forgotten how, but is being appropriately cautious about it. She felt it land in her chest like a warm stone. No, absolutely not. This is not what you're doing right now. She stood up decisively. In a way that announced she was definitely fine. I should sleep, she said. Yes, he said and didn't move. Good night. Good night, Wren. She went inside. Did not check the door. Lay down. Stared at the woven ceiling. You are in serious trouble. You are fully, completely, catastrophically aware of this, right? She was aware. It didn't help even a little. The morning it happened, the birds stopped first. That was how she knew, not the drums, not the lookouts. On the ridge with their mirror flash signals, those quick, bright blinks of reflected sun that had meant, for 3 days running, still there. Still watching. Still waiting for something to shift. The birds. Wren had been in the valley long enough to know its sounds, the way she'd once known the sounds of Silas Vane's house, the specific creak of the third stair, the way the kitchen door dragged in wet weather. The sounds you stop hearing because they're always there, and then the sounds you suddenly hear because they've stopped. The birds stopped at first light, and she was already sitting up before her mind had caught the reason, already reaching for the boots Saya had given her to replace the split ones. Already, in some deep animal part of herself, ready. Tahoe was outside her door. Of course he was. He looked at her when she came out. That look. The deliberate nothing that she could now read like a page she'd memorized. The thing behind it said, It's time. How many? She said, 6. Maybe 7. More than before. More than the 4 fires on the ridge. Lorne had sent for reinforcements. Of course he had. Because 4 wasn't enough too. Stop calculating. You'll calculate yourself into paralysis, and that is not useful right now. And Silas? Tahoe's jaw. That small flexion she'd learned to watch for. A wagon. East side of the ridge. He's not riding in, no. Silas Vane did not ride into things. He waited at a comfortable distance and let other people do the riding, and then arrived when the outcome was decided to sign whatever needed signing. She looked out at the valley. The camp was already moving, with the focused efficiency she'd watched develop over 3 days. Women and children repositioned toward the deep caves in the cliff face. Warriors at their positions, the whole valley holding its breath. Chief Noka, she said, he knows. What does he want me to do? Tahoe looked at her, a long look. The kind that weighs something, he said to ask you. She blinked. He said to ask me. Yes, he's the chief, yes, and he said, ask Wren what she wants to do. Those were his words. She stood with that for a moment. In 3 weeks, she had been assessed and doubted, and conditionally accepted, and given a dress, and told to grind corn, and handed her dead mother's letter, back in pieces, and watched and learned, and slowly, incrementally, placed her weight on a floor she was not entirely sure would hold her. And now the chief was asking what she wanted to do, because apparently, at some point she hadn't been precisely tracking. The floor had held. Don't think about that now. Think about what you want to do. She knew what she wanted to do. She'd known since she woke up. I want to go out there, she said. Tahoe said nothing. Not running, not surrendering. Out there. Standing, still nothing. Say something. I know, he said. I was waiting to see if you'd change your mind. Have I ever changed my mind? The almost smile. The corner of his mouth. No, he said. You haven't. They came down the eastern approach at mid-morning. 7 riders. She'd been right about 7. They came in the particular formation of men trying to project authority rather than exercise it. Spread wide, moving deliberately, rifles visible but not raised. The formation of men who want to appear in control of a situation they are not yet entirely in control of. She recognized Lorne at the front. Briggs Lorne was not an ugly man, which had always seemed to her a cosmic error of casting. Broad-shouldered, easy-moving. The kind of presence that made people assume competence before he'd demonstrated any. Gray at his temples now, the badge on his chest catching the morning light. She'd turned down his proposal in the lobby of the Silver City Hotel on a Tuesday in April of 1879. She remembered it precisely. The way his face had moved. Not hurt, not quite. Something that rearranged itself too fast for hurt. Something that filed the refusal under a different heading entirely. Unfinished, that was what his face had said. This is unfinished. She was about to finish it. Tahoe walked out to meet them, alone. No weapons visible, though she knew the bow was across his back, and she knew he could have it strung and drawn, in a motion too fast to track. He walked with the water-over-rock ease, unhurried, and stopped 30 feet from Lorne's horse. The horse was nervous. Interesting, Wren stood at the edge of camp. Behind her, she could feel the valley, the cottonwoods and the creek and the cliff walls, and the people who had conditionally, incrementally, become something she didn't have a word for yet, hers. Not her possession, not her claim, but hers in the way that belonging goes both directions. The place that had her, the people she had something with. Lorne said, loudly, for everyone present, we're here for the woman, Wren Calloway. You hand her over and we ride out. Nobody has to make a problem of this, Tahoe said. She is here of her own choosing. She's here because you. Of her own choosing, Tahoe said again. Same volume, same pace. The repetition doing something the volume alone couldn't. Lorne's jaw tightened. The law says. What law? Tahoe said. Not as a question. As a thing worth examining, what law in this territory, on this land, in this valley, that no surveyor had officially mapped and no jurisdiction had officially claimed, which Silas Vane had sold the location of illegally to a man with a badge, using that badge to collect a personal debt. What law? Lorne looked past Tahoe toward the camp. His eyes found her. She watched them find her. Watched the recognition, and then the second recognition. The one that came after. What she was wearing, the leather dress, yellow earth and worn, soft. the fringe moving in the morning air, the turquoise at her throat, the braids, the turquoise pin, her mother's pin, catching the light at her temple. She watched him process it. She stepped forward. Because she was not going to stand behind anyone for this. Not anymore. She walked out to stand beside Tahoe, not behind, beside. She felt him register it, the smallest adjustment of his weight, the slight repositioning that made room for her without retreating. She looked at Lorne. Cole, she said. His name, not Marshall, not Mr. Lorne. Cole, because his name was what she had, and his name was what she'd use. You didn't come here for me, she said. Not really. I know about the silver. I know about Silas's arrangement. I know what this valley is worth to him on a map once it's empty, a flicker. Something moved across his face. You don't know what you're. I stood in a hallway in Silver City for 20 minutes, she said. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Silence. The horses shifted. One of Lorne's men exchanged a look with the man next to him. The particular look of people reconsidering their participation in something. Wren? Lorne said, his voice dropping to the version he'd used in the hotel lobby before she'd said no, the version that was supposed to feel intimate. You don't belong here. Come back with us. We'll sort this out. No one has to know where you've been. No one has to know where you've been. As if the past 3 weeks were a mistake to be quietly undone. As if she were a woman who could be returned to her proper shelf. She thought of the calico dress in the corner, the wrong map, the desert that was supposed to finish the job. She thought of the letter in her mother's handwriting. She thought of the grinding stone and the blister and a child's gap-toothed grin. She thought of a creek at night and a man who went himself into the desert because some decisions make themselves. I belong exactly where I'm standing, she said. Lorne's face did the thing, the rearranging, the filing under a different heading. He raised his hand, the signal. The first shot went wide. Either the shooter was nervous or Lorne hadn't meant to start with shooting, had meant it as a warning, the kind of escalation that stays theoretical. Because the shot kicked up dirt 12 feet to her left and served no purpose except to make the horses scream, and the morning crack open into something different, something irreversible. Then everything happened at once, which is how everything always happens, not sequentially, not in the order that makes sense in retrospect, all at once. A simultaneous collapse of the before into the during. Wren dropped, not because she decided to, because Tahoe's hand was on her arm and he was already moving, and her body had learned in 3 weeks to trust his movement the way it had once trusted Thomas's voice, completely, without requiring the reason first. She went down behind a boulder at the edge of camp, flat, hands on the ground. The valley erupted, not just with sound, rifles, return fire, horses, voices in 2 languages, but with motion. The camp had 3 weeks of preparation in it, and it deployed now with the precision of people who had done this before. Not this exact thing, but this shape of thing. The shape of being required to defend what was theirs, against people who had decided their having it was inconvenient. She raised her head above the boulder. Tahoe was not where she'd left him. Of course he wasn't. He was there, moving through the gathering smoke, the bow in his hand, an arrow, drawn and released and drawn again, in the time it took her to locate him. He moved with a different quality than he moved in ordinary life. Not faster, exactly, but more concentrated, as if all the stillness he carried was being converted into something else. A shot hit the boulder 2 feet from her face. She pulled back. Her heart was doing something counterproductive. She told it to stop. It ignored her. Very useful, Wren. What can you actually do right now? She looked at what she had. The pistol from her boot. She'd kept it. She'd never stopped keeping it. 6 shots. She'd need to be closer for 6 shots to matter. She was not going to run into the middle of a firefight, because she was not going to call it what it was. Not right now, not this second, because she had feelings about a man. She was going to be strategic. She was good at strategic. She moved left, along the base of the cliff, away from the main firefight. Around Silas Vane was where Tahoe had said he'd be, east side of the ridge. A wagon, 2 horses. Her uncle, 61 years old, in a brown wool suit that was inappropriate for the terrain, and appropriate for every assumption he'd made about how this morning was going to go. He was watching the valley through a brass telescope. He hadn't seen her yet, 40 feet of open ground between her and the wagon. She crossed it at a controlled pace. The boots made almost no sound on the rocky ground, because they were the right boots, she thought, with the absurdity that threatened to become laughter, because Saya had given her the right boots. And she covered the 40 feet before Silas lowered the telescope. When he did, she was standing 10 feet from the wagon. He looked at her. She looked at him. A long moment of pure mutual recognition. Tie. The kind that doesn't require anything to be said, because everything has already been said, has been said for years across dinner tables, on locked doors, and one very incorrect map. Then Silas did something she hadn't anticipated. He smiled. Not the warm smile. Not the performance smile he used on county commissioners and land agents and the Methodist congregation. The other one. The one underneath all the others. Small and satisfied and not remotely warm. "Wren," he said. "Well, you look different." She was aware of how she looked. The leather dress, the braids, the turquoise. She was aware, and she did not care, and she wanted him to know she did not care. And from the way his eyes moved over her, she understood that he understood exactly that. "It's over, Silas," she said. "The land arrangement. Lorne, all of it, is it? Not a question." The tone of a man who is still comfortable. "Chief Noka has documentation. The trader's account of your arrangement. Witnesses who can place you at the telegraph office in Silver City on specific dates. The timeline of what you told Lorne and when. There are federal agents in Santa Fe who would be very interested in that documentation." Silas lowered the telescope, looked at her with the evaluating look. The same look he'd been giving her since she was 12 years old and newly in his house. "Come back with me," he said. She stared at him. "I'm serious, Wren. This," he gestured at the valley, "the leather dress, all of it. This isn't your life. You're making a point. You've made it. Come back and we'll." "You sent me into the desert to die," she said. The words came out very quiet. "Very even. You changed the map. You pointed me toward the dead ground, and you sent me out there, and you expected the desert to do what you didn't want to do yourself." Silas's expression didn't change, and that was the thing, that it didn't change. No denial, no protestation, no performance of shock or hurt. Just the evaluating look, steady, recalculating. "You couldn't prove that," he said. "I don't need to prove it," she said. "I just needed to know it, for myself. I needed to know exactly what you are so I could stop." She stopped. "So I could stop carrying the version of you I invented. The version that was her mother's brother. The version that had stood dry-eyed at the grave and offered safety. The version she'd been arguing with for 13 years instead of seeing clearly." "So you could stop what?" he said. "Hoping," she said. "For something that was never going to exist." Silas looked at her for a long moment. And for the first and only time in her memory, she saw something move in his face that might have been real. Something unscheduled. There and gone, too fast to be certain. Then it was gone. "The land deal will go through eventually," he said. "These things always do, maybe," she said. "But not today. And not this land." She turned her back on him. The most dangerous thing she could have done. She knew that. But some moments require the gesture, even when the gesture is impractical. Because turning your back on something is sometimes the only way to be certain you've finished with it. She heard him. She heard him, the sound of him stepping down from the wagon. A hand going to his coat, she spun. The pistol came up. Both of them, frozen. Silas's hand was inside his coat, had not cleared it yet, his eyes on the barrel, then on her face, then on the barrel again. "Don't," she said. Quiet. The word that had started all of this, and was ending it too. A long moment, Silas took his hand out of his coat. Slow. Empty. He looked at her with the evaluating look one last time. recalculating, arriving at something. "You're your mother's daughter," he said. She couldn't tell. She genuinely couldn't tell whether he meant it as an insult or whether it was the closest thing to honesty he was capable of. She said, "Yes," and kept the pistol up until he sat back down in the wagon. And then she turned back toward the valley and walked. She heard it before she felt it, which is apparently how it works, though she hadn't known that before. The sound arrives first, the crack and echo of it in the cliff walls. And then, the something. Not pain, not immediately. More like a very hard shove at her left side, just below the ribs, the sensation of impact before the sensation of damage. She stopped walking. Looked down. Oh, that's a problem. She put her hand to it, felt the wet. The specific warmth of something that was supposed to stay inside coming outside. She looked back. Silas was standing in the wagon. The Derringer, small, 2 shots, the kind of careful gun a careful man kept for exactly this kind of situation in his hand. His face doing the rearranging thing. Like he hadn't quite decided to do it until he had. She thought, "You missed what you were aiming for." She thought. The right boots really are quieter than he expected. She thought, Tahoe. And she turned back toward the valley and walked faster than she should have been able to. She made it to the boulder before her legs made their opinion known. The opinion was, "No, actually we're done now." She went down on one knee, then both, put her hand against the rock, breathed. The pain had arrived, not the sharp theatrical pain of stories, but the deep, organizing pain of a body that has received significant information and is processing it very loudly. "Get up, Wren, get up right now." She got up. She could hear the firefight. Still happening but differently. The rhythm had changed. Fewer shots, more space between. Something shifting. She walked toward it. Someone grabbed her arm, Sai. Coming from the left, from the cliff shadow, appearing from nowhere, the way everyone here appeared from nowhere, and Saya's face doing something Wren had never seen it do before. The document look, gone, replaced by something unguarded and immediate and entirely human. "You're hit, I noticed." "How bad? I don't know." "Walk with me, you need to stop." "I need to get back to camp and then I'll stop," Wren said. "Walk with me or don't, but I'm going." Saya walked with her, put her arm around Wren's waist, the right side, the unhurt side, and took weight with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman who has dealt with wounds before and is not going to waste time on dramatics about it. They walked. And then she saw Tahoe. She understood from the way he was moving that he hadn't seen her yet. He was at the center of the diminished firefight. 2 of Lorne's men had pulled back. She could see their horses moving east. 2 more were down but not dead, sitting with their hands showing. Lorne himself was on foot, which was a significant logistical and symbolic problem for a man who'd arrived on horseback. Tahoe was moving toward Lorne, the bow across his back again, knife in hand. The distance was close enough now that the bow was the wrong tool, and he was precise about tools. Then Lorne did something she recognized. The same motion as Silas. Different coat. Same motion, the hand going in, the small gun. She saw it. She moved, "Wren, you have been shot." "You have been shot, and you are moving toward," she moved. 20 feet between her and Tahoe. Less between Tahoe and Lorne. She was not going to close 20 feet before Lorne cleared his coat. She raised the pistol. Her hand was not shaking. Interesting. Her side was doing something loud and demanding, but her hand was steady, and she looked down the barrel at Lorne's gun hand, and she shot. She was not a precise shot. She was adequate. The bullet hit the Derringer, not center, but the edge, and the impact knocked it sideways and Lorne yelled, and the gun hit the ground, and she was down on her knees again before she understood she'd gone down. Tahoe turned and saw her. The whole world went very quiet, or seemed to. The sounds were still there, but they lost their urgency, and what remained was the specific quality of this moment. Tahoe crossing the ground between them in 4 steps, his face doing something she had never seen it do. The deliberate nothing gone, completely gone, all of it gone. as if something he'd been holding for a very long time had simply stopped being holdable. He was beside her, his hands on her face first, then moving, finding the wound, pressing. She heard the breath come out of him. Not a sound he made on purpose. "Wren, I'm here. You're—" I know, his hands were pressing and his face was very close, and she could see everything in it now. Everything he'd been managing for 3 weeks. Everything the deliberate nothing face had been containing. "The angle," she said. "What?" "The shot. The angle was bad. It went through the side, not—" She stopped. "I think it went through. I think it missed the important things." "You think?" "I'm fairly confident." "You're fairly confident." I'm quite confident." He looked at her. "Wren, Tahoe, stop talking. I'm trying to reassure you. Stop reassuring me and stop moving." "All right." She stopped moving. She let him press both hands against her side, and she let herself lean. Because the alternative was falling, and she was choosing to call it leaning, and she closed her eyes, just for a moment. The sounds around her organized into information. Lorne's voice somewhere, the cadence of a man being told what was going to happen next. The voices of the warriors. Saya, giving instructions in rapid Apache that Wren understood now as efficient medical triage. Then Chief Noka's voice. She opened her eyes. The chief stood 10 feet away. He had not rushed. He came at his own pace, which was the pace of a man who understands that arriving correctly matters more than arriving quickly. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at the scene. Lorne standing with 2 warriors on either side of him, his men sitting with their hands showing, the smoke clearing, and Wren on the ground with his son's hands pressed to her side. He looked at all of it. Then he looked at Lorne. He spoke in English, which she had not heard him use before, accented and deliberate, carrying a very particular choice. "You came here with guns and a paper," Chief Noka said. "The paper means nothing on land that was never yours to sell. The guns," he looked at the 2 men sitting, at the 2 who had fled. "The guns did not work as well as you hoped." Lorne's jaw. "You can't." "I have documentation," Chief Noka said. "The arrangement your man Vane made. The dates, the amounts. The names of those who witnessed it. I have letters addressed to the federal Indian agent in Santa Fe. They were sent before you arrived here, before she'd told the councils about Silas. He'd already known some of it. She'd given him the rest, and he'd had the days since to act. You were doing well," Tahoe had said. "I was waiting to see if you needed me to speak." The chief had been doing the same thing, on a larger scale, watching, waiting, letting things develop while simultaneously preparing the move that would end it. That's where Tahoe learned it, she thought. From watching his father, Lorne looked at the chief for a long moment, then at Wren, then at Tahoe's hands pressing against her side and the expression on Tahoe's face. Something moved in Lorne's eyes. Not remorse. She was not going to grant him remorse, but something adjacent to it. The specific discomfort of a man who has pursued something with absolute certainty for 3 years and is only now beginning to understand that what he pursued was never real, that the woman he'd filed under unfinished had never been his in the first place, had never been anyone's but her own. "Get my men," he said finally. "We're leaving. Your weapons stay," the chief said, a long pause. Fine, they left, the specific choreography of a retreat being managed with what dignity could be salvaged. She watched it from the ground with Tahoe's hands on her side, and Saya kneeling beside her with focused, competent hands, and she watched Lorne ride out of the valley, on someone else's horse and felt. Nothing dramatic. No triumph, no relief, not yet. Just the particular clarity of something finished. Something that had been unfinished for 3 years. Finished now. Silas Vane was brought down from the ridge by 2 warriors. He came with his hands visible, and his suit dusty, and his face doing the evaluating look, still calculating, still trying to find the angle. There was no angle. She watched him understand that. Watched the calculation run through its options, and find each one closed. Chief Noka said, "You will go to Santa Fe. The federal agent will be waiting." Silas looked at Wren. She looked back. There was nothing left she needed from him. Not anger, not vindication, not the satisfaction of a response. She'd turned her back on him, on the ridge. She looked away. That was the last time she looked at Silas Vane. They carried her to Saya's structure, which was larger than hers and had better light. Saya worked on the wound with the focused competence of someone who had been doing this long before arrived and would be doing it long after. The bullet had gone through. She'd been right about that. The angle bad for Silas but good for her, through the left side below the ribs. Missing what it needed to miss. It hurt. She was not going to complain about that. The alternatives were worse. Tejo sat outside the door. She could see his shadow through the gap. Still, the particular still that was not rest but watch. She'd seen it before from the inside of a structure at night, with danger on the ridge. It looked different now. Or she saw it differently. Same still. Different eyes looking at it, Saya. She said, while Saya was winding the binding. Don't talk. I need to say something. You need to hold still. Both. Saya paused. Looked at her with the document look. What? Your brother. A pause. I'm aware of my brother. I need to. Wren stopped. Started again. I'm not going to be cautious about it anymore. I've been very cautious and it takes an enormous amount of energy. And I've discovered I need that energy for other things. Saya looked at her for a long moment. This is what you needed to say. Yes. While I am binding your wound, it felt timely. Something moved in Saya's face. The document look, interrupted by something that was, unmistakably, the same corner of the mouth thing that Tejo did. Apparently it was familial. He's been in love with you, Saya said, returning to the binding. Since approximately the second day. Wren stared at her. He told you that? He didn't tell me anything. I have eyes. A pause. Hold still, Saya. What? You could have mentioned that. You could have had eyes. Wren opened her mouth. Closed it. Fair, she thought. That is actually fair. She slept through most of the afternoon. Not by choice. The body made that decision without consulting her, which she was beginning to recognize as a pattern. The body having opinions and acting on them unilaterally and apologizing for nothing. When she woke, the light through the gap in the door was the specific amber of late afternoon. In the desert, warm and heavy, and not in any hurry, Tejo was inside now, sitting against the far wall, the bow across his knees, watching her with the eyes that she now knew were not nothing, had never been nothing, were the opposite of nothing. She looked at him. He looked at her. How long have you been in here, she said. A while. That's not. A few hours. You should sleep. Later. Tejo. You scared me, he said. The words came out direct, unmanaged. The way words come out when a person has spent several hours holding them and has finally run out of the energy required to hold them any longer. She looked at him. I scared myself, she said. When you went down, his voice was even, but the evenness was costing him something. When I turned and saw you, I'm here. I know. Tejo. I'm here. He was quiet. The amber light moved across the floor between them. Come here, she said. He looked at her. You're wounded. I'm aware. Come here anyway. He moved from the wall to beside her. Sat. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The specific heat of a person who has been carrying something tense for hours and is slowly, carefully releasing it. She put her hand on his. He looked down at it. Then turned his hand over and held hers. The simple weight of it. The ordinary, extraordinary weight of a hand holding a hand. I'm not going to be cautious anymore, she said. He looked at her. About what? You know about what? I'd like to hear it. Of course you would. Wren, I'm not going to be cautious, she said. About the fact that She stopped. I haven't said this in a very long time. To anyone, take your time. That's the wrong advice. If I take my time, I'll reconsider, the corner of his mouth. Then don't take your time. I love you, she said, plain, unadorned. The way true things are sometimes most true when they're given without decoration. Tejo was quiet for a moment. The quiet of a person receiving something that requires a moment to hold properly before it can be answered. I know, he said. She stared at him. You know, yes. Saya said you've known since the second day. Saya talks too much. She said she had eyes. She has too many eyes. So you knew and you didn't. You needed to find it yourself. I told you. You needed to do things yourself. She looked at him. The amber light. The hand holding her hand. Tahoe? Yes, I love you and you are profoundly annoying. He smiled. Not the small, restrained one. Not the almost one. The full one. The one she'd seen once before briefly at the creek. The one that changed his whole face. Open and warm and real and just there. Offered without condition. I love you, Wren Calloway, he said. I have loved you since a woman, in a ripped blue dress, pointed a shaking gun at me, and then drank from my canteen like she hadn't decided yet if she was going to shoot me after. She laughed. The laugh pulled at the wound, and she made a sound that was less dignified than she would have preferred. And Tahoe's hand tightened on hers. And his other hand came up to her face, careful, and she leaned into it. Don't make me laugh, she said. It hurts, I'll try, he said. No promises. Chief Noka came at dusk. He came alone, just the man himself, arriving when he'd decided to arrive. He sat on the other side of her. She and Tahoe made room without moving apart, which she suspected was noticed and was not commented on. The chief looked at her for a long time. You walked back from the ridge, he said. Yes, after being shot. Yes, why? She thought about it, because there was something left to do. And I wanted to be there for it. Chief Noka was quiet. My son, he said finally. He has not looked at anything the way he looks at you. Not since. He stopped. Not for a long time. She waited. I don't know what this looks like, the chief said. What comes after this? For you, for him, for what the world outside this valley decides it thinks. Neither do I, she said. That doesn't frighten you. Everything frightens me, she said. I've stopped letting that be the deciding vote. The chief looked at her, then at his son, then he placed one hand briefly on her shoulder. Not a long touch, not ceremonial, just a hand. A moment of wait. Your mother was a good woman, he said. She went very still, you know, Saya told me. Years ago. I had no way to find the family. He paused. Now the family found us. He stood. Rest, he said. Tomorrow you can do whatever you want to do. He walked out. She sat with Tahoe's hand in hers, and her mother's pin in her hair, and the chief's words, settling into the places that had been waiting for them. The family found us. The ceremony happened 3 days later. Not a wedding ceremony. Not anything with a direct equivalent in any language she spoke. Something Chiricahua. Something she was told about in pieces and accepted in pieces, asking questions where she could, and trusting where she couldn't. It happened at the creek. Where else? She stood beside Tahoe in the yellow earth dress with the turquoise stones and the leather fringe moving in the morning air and her mother's pin catching. The early light and her hair in 2 braids, and felt very clearly the specific weight of a moment that is not the end of something, but the declared, witnessed beginning. Saya stepped forward when the moment came, and she took the tortoiseshell pin from Wren's hair, and she replaced it, carefully, with both hands, with the attention of someone doing something that means more than the action, with a different pin. Silver. Chiricahua made. 3 turquoise stones, drilled and set and worn smooth by the hands of women who had worn it before. She set Wren's pin back too. Both of them now, side by side. Wren touched them. Old and new, carried and given. The things you keep and the things that find you. She looked at Saya. Saya looked back, the document look. And underneath it, warm. Actually warm. The warmth of a woman who has decided, fully and finally, what she thinks of you. My mother would have liked you, Wren said. She would have driven me to madness, Saya said. Like you do. Is that a yes? It's a yes. That evening, on the ridge, her and Tahoe, side by side, looking out over the valley that was gold and green, and cut through with the silver line of the creek in the last light. Her side ached. Would ache for weeks. Would leave a scar she was already privately deciding to consider a decoration. The valley was below them, all of it. The cottonwoods, the fires, the horses, the life of it moving in the evening air. She thought of the desert. 3 weeks ago. The map that was wrong, and the horse that was gone, and the canteen that rattled empty, and the choice. Sit down and let the desert make the decision, or get up and walk. She'd walked. She'd walked into something she hadn't planned for, and couldn't have predicted, and would not. She was entirely clear about this. Would not undo. What are you thinking? Tahoe said. I'm thinking about the map. The wrong one. And I'm thinking that if Silas had given me the right one, I would have gone to Santa Fe. Found a room, found work. Lived a careful, manageable life, and never. She stopped. Never what? He said. She looked at him. Never found this. He was quiet for a moment. The map was wrong, he said. And you walked anyway. Yes, that's the part that matters. The walking, the not sitting down. She looked at the valley, the last light on the water. The smoke rising thin and blue from the fires below as long as the sun rises, she said. He looked at her. What? Something I've been thinking about saying. For a while, she turned to him. I'll stay here. I'll learn what I don't know. I'll grind the corn badly and get better at it and drive Sia to madness and... She stopped. I'll stay. As long as you want me to stay. As long as the sun comes up. Tahoe looked at her. That look, the one she knew now. The one that was not nothing and had never been nothing. And was, she understood now, one of the most comprehensive forms of attention she had ever been given by anyone in her entire life. As long as it rises. He said. He reached out, took her hand, carefully, because of the angle and the wound, and held it. Below them the valley settled into the particular gold of the last minutes before dark. The creek caught the light and scattered it. The cottonwoods moved. A child's voice rose and was answered. She felt the weight of the valley, the weight of the creek and the cliff, and the grinding stone and Saya's document eyes, and the chief's hand on her shoulder, and the letter in her mother's handwriting that said, I hope she finds whatever she is looking for. She had. It did not look like what she'd expected. It did not look like anything she could have planned for or mapped in advance or arrived at by following a correct set of directions. It looked like this. Exactly this. A woman and a man on a ridge in the last light of an October evening in 1882 in the New Mexico Territory. In a world that would not make room for them without a fight. Holding hands while the sun went down, and already waiting for it to come back up. She learned to grind the corn properly that winter. It took 3 months. Saya watched her complete a full grinding without stopping and said, better, and went back to what she was doing, which Wren had come to understand was Saya's highest register of praise. She would take it. Spring came to the valley green, and loud with returning birds. She stood at the creek in the early morning with the water running cold and fast from the snowmelt above, and listened to the birds and thought, I know this sound now. I know what it means when they stop. Tahoe came to stand beside her. They stood in the sound of the creek and the birds for a while. Not talking, not needing to. Saya is going to make me redo the cord work on the south shelter, he said. She told me. She's right. It's fine. It's not fine. She showed me the gap. You can see daylight through it. Small daylight. Tahoe. Very small daylight. She looked at him. He looked back. The creek went over its stones. The birds made their spring noise. The valley woke up around them the way it woke up every morning, slowly, and then all at once, beginning again with the uncomplicated commitment of a place that has decided to keep existing. Go fix the cord work, she said. Later now, later, he said, is when I was planning to. She opened her mouth. Closed it. You are profoundly annoying, he said. You've mentioned, she laughed. The wound was healed. The laugh didn't pull anymore. Just came, clean and free, the way laughter comes when you've stopped rationing it. When you've stopped treating it like a resource that might run out. The sun came up over the eastern ridge, and they were still there, which was the promise, and they kept it.